Welcome to the NNJR Trackside Classroom Series. My name is Bill Gilbert. I'm one of the NNJR Chief Instructors, and today our topic is consistency. This presentation is designed for student drivers, and although I think any driver is going to get some benefit, I would hope. But with that said, I'm going to dive right into the presentation. So, as always, we have the disclaimer that we do our best to put good information here, and we think it's safe to use it, but you always use it at your own risk. So here's what we're going to talk about today. A quick reminder about the basics of track driving, in case you're brand new to track driving or have only done one or two events. This should be a good reminder. Then we're going to zoom in on consistency, define what it is, more importantly, why it matters, and obviously how to actually do it, how to become more consistent. And then we'll wrap up. So some quick reviews of the basics of track driving. Reference points are essential to all drivers. Certainly to beginners, we think of having the basic reference points, but as you get more experience, you'll discover that not that you don't use those, you will use those, but you'll use more. So being aware of reference points and how to use them is a big deal, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But the basic reference points: where do we get on the brakes? Where do we turn in? Where is the apex in the corner, and where do we track out? And of course, those points determine what's called the line, the way that the track that the car, or I should say the path that the car takes around the track. And there's a rhythm in track driving. We use the gas and accelerate on the straights, actually exiting corners to be precise. We brake while going straight before the corner, and then we relax the brakes. We don't necessarily come off of them, but we relax the brakes, turn in, and then come off the brakes in a typical corner. And that pattern repeats. Sometimes we brake less, sometimes we brake more, sometimes we might just lift, but that's the rhythm, the basics of track driving. Now, consistency then means doing all of that kind of the same way. And to define it, we're going to use those reference points. We're going to talk about the turn-in point, which is a particularly important point in a corner. So to be consistent, we're going to have to be able to turn in at the same point lap after lap. And by that, I mean plus or minus an inch or two. 6 inches maybe, but 6 inches in some corners is not really enough. But we should strive for a couple of inches. We should strive for the same speed when we turn in. And, if one lap we're at 62 miles an hour and the next lap we're at 68 miles an hour, obviously that corner is going to drive very differently. So again, plus or minus a couple of miles an hour. And another way to think about the consistency is that path around the track. I love this quote that if the tires were paintbrushes, and after 10 laps, the lines you painted were no wider than the first lap, unlike the tracks in the snow that you see in the photo on the slide. So this is what we're striving for on track. Now, why is it important at all? Well, to be fast, and more importantly, to be safe, we first have to be consistent, because getting better on track is all about better technique. And if we don't have consistency, then we don't have anything, basically. And certainly it relates to safety. We have to know, if we're at 62 miles an hour entering a corner one time and 68 the next, do we even know what the limit is at that corner? It might be 69 miles an hour, and we're very close to, being in trouble. We need the consistency so that we can build up things like that. And also, did something change? I'm used to turning in at 62 miles an hour. I turn in at 62 and the car doesn't turn. Well, maybe some oil got spilled on the track. That's a great example of why consistency is really important. And, perhaps the most important, if we're going to get better, we have to have a baseline. And if we don't have that baseline, that consistent baseline, then we can't improve. If we're going to change something, maybe we're going to turn in sooner. Well, does that make the corner better or worse? Well, if we haven't, if we don't have that baseline, we don't know. So, how do we improve baseline? This is what we're going to spend most of our time on. I'm going to suggest 4 ways to get better. First is simple awareness, paying real attention to the turn-in and other reference points. Are they always the same? And use indexing to measure your pace. That means, exiting a corner, pick, a spot that maybe a spot of paint on the road, a reference along a flag station, and just note whatever's easier, your RPM or your speed. And then if you do something different next time, then you can see whether you're faster or slower. But before that, are you always at the same speed or RPM at that point? If exiting turn 7 at lightning, as I straighten the wheel to go up the hill, if I glance at the tack and I'm always at 6,000 RPM, that's great because we're consistently getting through that corner. Can we get better? Probably. But now we're consistent, and now we can make a change and see if we can do better. And if we make a change, for example, to try to move our point where we get our foot on the floor a couple of feet earlier, and we find we're at 6,200 RPM, we've gotten better. That's how we use indexing. And awareness, really, to get good at it, pick 1 or 2 areas of focus. Pick a specific corner or pick a specific technique, whether it's your turn-in point, exactly how you're using the steering wheel, how fast, that sort of thing. And just be aware of how consistent you are. Take a run and just focus in 1 or 2 areas, 1 or 2 corners, 1 or 2 techniques, and be aware of how consistent or not you are. That will automatically make you better. If you do have video, you can compare laps, potentially, especially between session. You can look at different laps and see, am I turning in at the same point? Am I braking at the same point? That sort of thing. Now, I've already mentioned reference points, but let's refine that a little bit. Braking point is obviously where I think I'm going to brake, but it's really where I tell myself to come off the gas and move my foot to the brake pedal. It's not technically where I hit the brakes. It's where I begin the process of getting to the brakes. So there's a delay in there for all drivers. And that can help you calibrate, what is your beginning and braking point. Be aware of where your turn in is, and also be aware of where you release the brakes in the corner, called end of braking. There's a point where your foot comes off the brake pedal. It's usually somewhere between the turn in and the apex, and be aware of that point. Again, we're talking about awareness, focusing on the reference points, and am I being consistent? Now, if you have more experience, then here's some other things to focus on. How much brake do I have on at turn in? On a 0 to 10 scale, is it a 2? Is it a 4? Is it a 5? How much gas do I have on at the apex? Do I still have some steering input at the apex? These are reference points to check yourself if you've got more experience. If you're a beginner, don't worry about those. Now, of course, how consistent we are, and for that matter, how smooth we are, A lot has to do with how we use the controls. And braking is one of those areas that beginners struggle with to get consistent with. And we have to train that right foot to be more sensitive. So can I consistently, in a heavy braking zone, turn one at Lightning, turn one at Watkins Glen, turn one at lots of tracks, VIR, where I need heavy braking, can I consistently hit 9 out of 10 on the brakes and get a consistent initial slowdown? Or in a corner that doesn't need so much brake, can I consistently do a 2 or a 3? Steering, same thing. How smoothly am I winding and unwinding the steering? And the string theory says as I turn in, I have to be using less brake. If I'm still on a 9 on the brake pedal, I can't turn in, or if I do, the car is going to push. It's not going to be happy. So as we turn the wheel, we have to be relaxing the brakes. And the same, of course, applies to the gas pedal. Am I driving with an egg under my foot? Am I using the gas in a progressive way as opposed to just putting my foot on the floor all at once? And cornering, this is probably for those of you with more experience, but let's work on the seat of the pants. What does a car feel like in the middle of the corner as it's cornering hard? That's a sensitivity to what the car is doing based on what you as the driver are doing. And of course, we can't talk about consistency without talking about vision. And some basic reminders here that we always want to focus on the next reference point. And so let's say we're in the braking zone and we're getting, but we're not yet at the turn-in point. Well, we want to focus on that turn-in point until we're sure we know where it is. And then we can move our focus to the apex and pick up that turn-in point with our peripheral vision. But there's a cadence or a timing in that is important, because if we move our eyes too fast off the turn-in, we may turn in early. It's a common mistake. So getting your sequence of how we're looking is really important. Of course, we're always wanting to look where we want the car to go. So, if we're in the braking zone, yes, we're focused on the turn-in, but we're going to glance at the apex and maybe even at track out, for two reasons. That's where we want the car to go, and also to make sure there isn't something unusual, a car spun or whatever it happens to be in front of us. But our main focus is going to be on what the next reference point is, in front of us, with the peripheral vision as soon as we telling us when we can move ahead. And of course, once we get familiar with the track, we know what's around the corner, so we can visualize, and we know in our mind's eye what's around that corner, even though if we can't see it. And scanning means, as I mentioned before, looking ahead, but also, scanning the mirrors, not in the middle of a corner, but in the straightaways and after a corner. Now, here's some refinements. Again, for those of you with more experience, try to see something new every lap, and come in and write it down on your track map. Maybe the sun or shadows change what you see. Maybe you see something going on the track surface, some areas that are grainy, some that are smooth. You can see which areas are on camber or off camber, that sort of thing. So to summarize, I've given you some ways to improve your consistency, starting with being aware, focusing on one corner or one technique. Use indexing to measure how you're doing. Be precise with your reference points, and use more reference points. Don't be afraid to pick up additional reference points. Advanced drivers do that all the time. Focus on being sensitive and smooth with the controls. And if you have more experience, start refining that seat of the pants. And of course, we're always looking ahead, scanning, observing, but at the same time, keeping our focus, where we want the car to be next. I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, gilbert4@rcn.com, or look me up at the track. I'm always happy to answer questions and talk driving at any track event that I'm at. So with all of that said, I look forward to seeing you at the track real soon. And I hope you found some of these tips useful. Have a good day.